The conference room falls silent. Across the polished mahogany table, 5 executives in $1,000 suits lean forward, hanging on every word that flows from Andres Rivera's lips. The same lips that classmates once mocked. The same accent they said would never open doors, only close them. "We'd be honored to partner with Rivera Solutions," one stammers, the desperation barely concealed behind his rehearsed smile. Andres pauses. His Mexican accent is thick and unapologetic as the day he first stepped foot in Texas 20 years ago. He remembers when these same men, different faces, same dismissive energy, told him he'd never amount to anything because of how he spoke. But here's what they didn't understand then, and what you're about to discover now. Sometimes the very thing the world uses to tear you down becomes a foundation upon which you build your empire. Have you ever been told you don't belong? That your voice doesn't matter? That you should change who you are to fit in? If you ever felt invisible because of how you sound, where you come from, or what makes you different, this story will shatter everything you thought you knew about turning rejection into rocket fuel. Because Andres Rivera didn't just prove them wrong. He made them beg. Picture this. A 17-year-old boy walking into Jefferson High School in Dallas, Texas. His worn backpack holds dreams bigger than the small Mexican town he left behind, but his English carries the melody of his homeland. Every syllable a reminder that he doesn't quite fit. Can you even read English? The snickers cut through the classroom like knives as Andres stumbled through a passage from Romeo and Juliet. His cheeks burned red, but not from embarrassment, from fury. The teacher's impatient sigh said everything. "You're wasting our time." Fast forward to University of Texas. Same story, different stage. Professor Williams barely glanced up when Andres presented his innovative approach to data encryption. The ideas were brilliant, revolutionary even. But the delivery? "Perhaps you should focus on subjects that require less verbal communication," Williams suggested, his condescension wrapped in false kindness. The breaking point came during his senior year. After presenting a project that would later inspire his multimillion-dollar company, a classmate laughed openly. "Dude, seriously, just stick to manual labor. Nobody's going to take you seriously talking like that." That night, Andre stared at his reflection in his tiny dorm room. 2 paths stretched before him. Change his voice, sand away the edges of who he was, become someone else's version of acceptable, or weaponize their doubt. He chose war. Not the loud, dramatic kind, the quiet, relentless kind that happens at 3 a.m. in empty libraries while everyone else sleeps. The kind that turns every insult into fuel, every dismissal into determination. "They think my accent makes me stupid," he whispered to himself, opening his textbooks. "Let me show them what stupid really builds." Comment below if you've ever felt invisible because of how you sound. Because what happened next will prove that our differences aren't our weaknesses. They're our secret weapons. While his classmates celebrated graduation with parties and vacations, Andres was already 3 steps ahead, securing an entry-level position at Rivera Solutions. The salary barely covered his rent, but he wasn't there for the money. He was there to learn, to listen, to study the game from the inside. Every morning, he arrived 30 minutes early. Every evening, he left 30 minutes late. But it was those moments in between, the meetings, the presentations, the casual conversations, where the real education happened. What Andres is trying to say is, his supervisor, Marcus, had a habit of finishing his sentences, speaking over him with a casual dismissal of someone who'd never questioned their right to be heard. The conference room would nod along, grateful for the translation, never pausing to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Andres could speak for himself. But here's what they missed while they were busy interrupting. Andres was taking notes, not just on the projects, but on them, how they communicated, what they missed, where their blind spots were. And the biggest blind spot of all? They had no idea how to talk to the growing population of bilingual employees joining their company. Late nights in his studio apartment, Andres began sketching out ideas. What if there was software that helped bilingual teams communicate more effectively? What if the very challenge he faced daily, bridging language barriers, was actually a massive market opportunity? His colleagues saw his accent as a limitation. He began to see it as market research. The prototype took 8 months to build, fueled by stolen hours and weekend coding sessions. When he finally demonstrated it to a small group of Spanish-speaking employees at TechFlow, their reaction was electric. "This is exactly what we needed," Maria from accounting whispered, tears in her eyes. Finally, someone who understands. But convincing his supervisors was a different story. "It's a nice hobby project, Andres," Marcus said, not bothering to hide his patronizing tone. "But let's focus on your actual job responsibilities." That was the moment Andres realized he wasn't building software for them anymore. He was building it despite them. 6 months later, he submitted his resignation letter. TechFlow Solutions had taught him everything he needed to know, not about technology, but about opportunity. Sometimes the biggest opportunities hide in plain sight, disguised as problems everyone else is too comfortable to solve. Rivera Solutions started in the garage, not because of the romantic Silicon Valley cliché, but because it was all Andres could afford. 1 desk, 2 monitors, and a dream that felt simultaneously impossible and inevitable. The first investor meeting was a masterclass in humiliation. Andres walked into the glass tower office, his presentation polished, his numbers flawless, his vision crystal clear. He spoke for 15 minutes about the untapped market of bilingual workplace communication, backed by research, projected revenues, and testimonials from early users. The response? Silence. Then, "Your idea has merit, but..." There it was. But that had followed him his entire life. "But frankly, we're concerned about your ability to represent the company at a leadership level. Communication is everything in this business, and well..." The investor's voice trailed off, his meaning brutally clear. "You mean my accent?" Andre said, no longer 22 and embarrassed. At 28, he had learned to name the elephant in the room. "We just think perhaps you'd be better suited for a tech." Andres walked out of that office and sat in his car for 10 minutes, not in defeat, but in clarity. They weren't rejecting his business plan. They were rejecting him. And in doing so, they revealed exactly why his product would succeed. Because there were millions of Andres Riveras in corporate America. Brilliant minds trapped behind language barriers, passed over for promotion, relegated to behind-the-scenes roles despite being the most innovative voices in the room. Nickel roll, behind the scenes. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later, when Ramirez Construction, a growing company with a largely bilingual workforce, agreed to beta test his platform. Within 30 days, their internal communication efficiency increased by 40%. Productivity soared. Employee satisfaction ratings hit company records. "This changes everything," CEO Roberto Ramirez told Andres during their follow-up meeting. "But more than that, you get us. You understand what we need because you've lived it." That single sentence rewrote Andres' entire strategy. He stopped pitching to venture capital firms filled with people who saw his accent as a liability. Instead, he pitched to companies who saw it as proof he understood their market. Hit that like button if you believe our differences are our superpowers. Because what happened next proves that sometimes the people who reject you are actually doing you the biggest favor of your life. 5 years later, Rivera Solutions had generated $15 million in revenue. The bilingual communication platform had evolved into a comprehensive workplace integration system used by Fortune 500 companies across 3 countries. And Andres? He still spoke with the same Mexican accent that had once made people dismiss him. Only now, that dismissal had transformed into desperation. "Andres, how have you been, man?" The voice belonged to Marcus, his former supervisor from TechFlow Solutions. The same Marcus who used to interrupt him in meetings, who told him to stick to actual job responsibilities. They were at a tech conference in Austin, and Marcus approached with a kind of enthusiasm reserved for lottery winners and long-lost relatives. "I've been following Rivera Solutions. Incredible work. We should grab coffee sometime. TechFlow is looking to expand our communication tools, and I immediately thought of you." Andre smiled, the same measured smile he perfected over years of being underestimated. "I appreciate that, Marcus. My assistant will send you our partnership requirements." The irony wasn't lost on him. TechFlow Solutions, along with dozens of other companies, were now paying Rivera Solutions consulting fees that exceeded Andres' former annual salary by a factor of 10. But the sweetest vindication came during an industry panel discussion. Professor Williams, his former university instructor, was in the audience, the same man who had suggested Andres avoid verbal communication careers. After Andres' keynote presentation about innovation in workplace diversity, Williams approached the stage. Andres, I don't know if you remember me, but I taught you at UT. I just wanted to say, I remember, Andres interrupted gently, his accent carrying the quiet authority that comes from being proven right by time and success. You suggested I pursue something that required less verbal communication. Williams's face flushed red. I was wrong, obviously. You weren't wrong about communication being important, Andres replied. You were wrong about what effective communication sounds like. The moment crystallized everything. His accent hadn't disappeared. He'd chosen never to hide it. Every board meeting, every investor call, every keynote speech, he spoke in his own voice. Because he'd learned something the doubters never understood. Authenticity isn't a weakness to overcome. It's a strength to leverage. The same people who once told him he'd never amount to anything were now requesting meetings, hoping for partnerships, begging for the very expertise they'd once dismissed. But this story isn't really about revenge. It's about recognition, the kind that comes from within, not from others. Andres realized something profound during those early days of building Rivera Solutions. His accent had never been the problem. The problem was a world that confused familiarity with competence, that mistook different for deficient. Every bilingual employee who found their voice through his platform, every company that discovered untapped potential in their diverse workforce, every young immigrant who saw Andre speak at conferences and thought, maybe I belong here too, they all proved the same point. Our differences aren't bugs in the system. They're features. My accent tells a story, Andres explained to a reporter last year. It says I'm adaptable enough to master 2 languages, resilient enough to navigate 2 cultures, and innovative enough to build bridges others can't see. Why would I hide that? Rivera Solutions now employs over 200 people across 4 countries. 40% of his leadership team are first-generation immigrants. Not because of some diversity initiative, but because Andres learned something his former colleagues never did. Different perspectives don't just add value, they create it. The company's mission statement hangs in their Austin headquarters. Communication isn't about sounding the same. It's about being understood. Every client meeting, every presentation, every moment when someone expects him to apologize for who he is, Andres remembers that 17-year-old boy stumbling through Shakespeare in a Texas high school. That boy thought his accent was a wall between him and his dreams. He was wrong. It was a bridge. The most successful people aren't those who eliminate their differences. They're the ones who weaponize them. They turn their obstacles into advantages, their rejections into redirections, their limitations into launching pads. Today, when Andres Rivera walks into a boardroom, people don't hear an accent. They hear authority. They don't see someone who doesn't belong. They see someone who built his own table when others wouldn't give him a seat at theirs. He runs Rivera Solutions in his own voice, exactly as he promised himself he would 20 years ago. So here's my challenge to you. What's your accent? What part of yourself have you been told to hide, change, or apologize for? What if that thing, that exact thing, is actually your competitive advantage waiting to be unleashed? The world doesn't need another copy. It needs the original you. If this story inspired you to embrace what makes you different, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, we're exploring another incredible journey of transformation, the story of a woman who turned her biggest failure into a billion-dollar empire. Because on Earthly Tales, we believe your differences aren't your limitations. They're your superpowers.